So we are looking at the papers, Fleet Street papers of Sunday, the 16th of May 2021. And the Observer, this one, is running a reluctant piece about, well, both items are reluctant. One is about Israeli airstrike claims 8 young cousins. And it doesn't have any factual, contextual facts about how is it that these atrocities are being allowed to be perpetrated against the Palestinians. And the piece about Johnson must think again on plans to relax COVID rules, but there is no, this is, of course, this item was written at least 24 hours ago. So this is 2030 GMT, and this must have been written at least 24 hours ago. And so far in the last 24 hours, there has been no actual confirmation of any change by Johnson to the relaxing of the restrictions. And there are reports from India that show that although their official statistics about the spread of the virus is being manipulated to show that the virus is spreading more slowly than it had done a week earlier. And although Johnson has been asked to delay relaxing the rules, there is no conclusive evidence that he is going to delay. And politically, there is nothing that is happening in this country as a result of any action by the opposition, so-called, in parliament to challenge the Johnson cabal. And it's the Labour Party that has been politically murdered by Keir Starmer. It remains in a state of absence. So the politics of the UK remains totally absent. There is no democracy, there is no accountability, and there is no demand for democracy or accountability. It is completely in the darkness and the dark ages, and that imperils the safety, security, freedom, and humanity of people. This kind of suspension of everything that is supposedly integral part of the normality. That suspension has happened over many years, but it has come to this state during this pandemic. And it's not just the pandemic of the virus, the pandemic of the deadly silence and ineffectiveness and inactivity by the elements that cling to lucrative allowance producing elected posts, but they don't do the elected service, the service they're elected to provide and deliver. So it's encompassing everything. And as we have seen in the case of the so-called referendum about the corrupt post of elected mayor in Tower Hamlets and in next door Newham, the people who are supposed to be campaigning against the mayor system allegedly included all the parties, political parties, and yet they managed to get only 18%. So there is not one lie, several lies in that fact. And the statistics, the data, the official kind of records of the corrupt behavior by the corrupt elected mayor post holder, the records show that Lutfur Rahman committed multiple wrongs and crimes, including corruption. And that is the record of the published order against Lutfur Rahman by the election commissioner Richard Morey, dated the 23rd of April 2015. We have already covered in several of our editions the negligence shown to the 4 schoolgirls in Tower Hamlets by Tower Hamlets Council, the 4 schoolgirls from Bethnal Green. Now, we have not spoken as much about the role of the elected councillors. We have spoken more about the role of the elected mayor post holder, but we have not spoken as much about the role in all of that by the elected councillors. When in 2010 we started the campaign against the elected mayor corruption, or the corrupt elected mayor post then being touted for at the expense of Tower Hamlets, we were very conscious about the bad effects that an elected mayor post and post holder would cause on the ordinary people and population in Tower Hamlets. That realization and that connection and that correlation remain the same, unaltered. In fact, if anything has changed, it is the extent of the bad things that have happened. That extent has increased. The volume and the actual amount of bad things that an elected councillor kind of does if the elected councillor post holder is complicit with the post holder of the corrupt elected mayor post holder. And that has been the case. We have seen that even those who claim to be, who have actually publicly stated that they were against the mayor system, have continued at the same time to praise the incumbent in that corrupt post. The crook, John Biggs, has been able to control the volume and the stance of the elected councillors in relation to the so-called campaign that they were supposedly making and doing to stop the elected mayor post being foisted on Tower Hamlets. They were trying to scrap it, end it, bring an end to it. They have not brought an end to it, and that is because essentially they have not campaigned. They have claimed to have been campaigning, but they haven't. In June 2020, that is just under one year ago, claims were made that thousands of signatures had been already collected by one or two people, whoever they were, against the mayor system. And these so-called signed petition never saw the light in terms of getting properly filed and applied within the procedures, and the impact of the thousands of signatures being made to be felt in Tower Hamlets by the council being, or the Tower Hamlets Council corrupt bureaucracy being made to recognize the alleged thousands of signatures to the alleged petition against the corrupt mayor system. That was a year ago. And in May 2018, I was told by one of the Labour Party members, known members in Tower Hamlets, that they had collected signatures against the mayor system, but those signatures had been sabotaged by somebody connected with a Bangladeshi kind of stooge used by John Biggs. So there is more evidence of lying, even by the ones who claim to be at one level or another level, in one form or another form, allegedly opposed to the corrupt mayor system. Then there should have been no lying, no dishonesty, but there has been, and there is. So therefore, what we are saying on the evidence of all of this is that no campaign was actually run against the corrupt mayor system. And adding this, that any campaign to be sustainable and of substance, it takes at least a year or more than a year. And all attempts to do a substantial, sustainable and sustained campaign against the corrupt mayor system were sabotaged, undermined, and betrayed. And all of this happened with the active participation in the undermining and the betrayal and the denial and the lying in the context of the Tower Hamlets community by mainly Bangladeshi members of the Labour Party or Bangladeshi councillors carrying the Labour Party card. The fact that they don't do campaign is also linked to the fact that they don't know what campaign is, what a campaign is. For example, in the so-called campaign about the Bell Foundry in Whitechapel Road, several members of the Townless Council allegedly campaigned against the closure, against the scrapping of the Bell Foundry in favor of a hotel project contractor. But they didn't involve the community. These councillors did not involve the community, which raises the question, do they have brains, these councillors? If they have brains, then what kind of campaign is it that doesn't involve the community? And what kind of influence do these individual councillors think they represent against the developers? They don't represent any influence whatsoever. If it is manifest, if it is demonstrated, if it is evident, if it is seen by all concerned that these councillors are just hopping from one topic to another just to be able to put on their CV that they have done this. A campaign is not about the CV. A campaign is seriously about doing, not battle, the war. They say that the war is continuing. The war is not continuing. War is not a joke. It's not an item of gossip. The war is risking everything you have. And they didn't risk anything. So they appeared under the direction and leadership of a racist moron and surfaced there to be photographed and filmed. That's it. The racist moron has no idea about campaigning. No racist has done any campaign against a kind of any agency of the state, either central government or local government. Entire Hamler's successful campaign for 80, 90 years. And the majority of the criminals who voted for the keeping of the mayor system are racists. They are working on the assumption that they would manipulate the Labour Party in the way that prevents the post being occupied by a Bangladeshi or a non-Anglo-Saxon or a non-white person. How is that happening? That is happening because the various elements that are doing the controlling of the kind of London Council of Mosques, Tower Hamlets Council of Mosques, and the factions in the Labour Party. These are dishonest people and these are ignorant people. They don't have the real understanding of morality and ethics and accountability, and they don't have any recognition of the needs of the people who are entitled to services by the locally elected council, which is in a state of perennial denial, continuous perpetuation of denial and disrespect to the community. And contrary to the assumptions that outsiders may have about the people represented by the likes of Lutfur Rahman. Lutfur Rahman is not capable of understanding democracy, let alone delivering democracy. And these are not people, Luther Rahman et al. Are not people that are capable of delivering a narrative in defense of the community that matches the narrative of denial of the community's rights, the narrative as confected by the racists and the supporters of anti-democratic status quo. These anti-democratic status quo supporters remained committed to racism, including to all the bad components of empire and imperialism. So these are not people that are going to do anything to uphold universal human rights, uphold universal democratic rights, uphold universal moral rights, uphold universal ethical rights in Tower Hamlets or in a similar comparable borough, such as it happens, the next door London borough of Newham, where an almost identical outcome was procured by the crooks in control of the Labour Party in Newham. The crooks did not campaign against the corrupt post of elected mayor. The crooks pretending, even the crooks, including the crooks that pretended to be personally not impressed by the incumbent in that corrupt post, that is Roxana Fias. Even though they say, and they did say quite reliably and quite credibly that they were not impressed by the behavior and the abilities of Roxana Fias. Even they failed to make a mark. In fact, they didn't fail. They intended the mayor system to remain. And that includes the councillors, Labour Party councillors, as well as the others in the Labour Party in Newham, members of the Labour Party in Newham. All the councillors in Newham are indifferent to accountability, indifferent to real accountability owed by the elected councillors to the electors in Newham. And that is what has happened. The Labour Party councillors don't interact with ordinary Labour Party members, and ordinary Labour Party members don't interact with ordinary members of the electorate in Newham. It is as bad in Newham, therefore, as it is in Tower Hamlets. Crime and criminality in the communities, both in Newham and in Tower Hamlets, are rampant. And there is nothing that either council in Tower Hamlets or in Newham is doing anything about ending the vicious domination of criminality on council estates or housing estates across Newham and across Tower Hamlets. And the overwhelming majority of the criminals in Tower Hamlets, for example, in Tower Hamlets estates and comparable patches in the borough, are children, young persons born to Bangladeshi families. This is not something that we are saying for the first time. This is something we've been saying right from the beginning. So there are thousands of young people engaged in criminality or semi-criminal behavior in Tower Hamlets. Now you search the internet or search the kind of published Facebook accounts or YouTube accounts published by the likes of Lutfur Rahman and his kind of colluders in the name of yes for mayor, and you will not find any evidence. You will not find any evidence in the contents of those published posts and videos that either Lutfur Rahman or his colleagues are colluders, or their counterparts in the Labour Party in Tower Hamlets are in the slightest bit interested in knowing about the crimes and criminality that dominate the council estates, nor are they, most certainly, nor are they going to be interested in opposing ending that dominance by crime and criminality on the council estates in Tower Hamlets. So when on the occasion of May, this is the like the anniversary, this is 16th of May, so it was near the 22nd of May 2014 when the so-called second election for the corrupt post of elected mayor took place or was staged in Tower Hamlets. We have got quite a bit of updates on that date and that perpetration. When the so-called election took place and was followed by the counting of the votes, the first counting of the votes took place at the Troxy. The Troxy is a venue situated in the Commercial Road. It is near the Limehouse railway station in Commercial Road. So when the counting was taking place in the evening, there were literally several hundred people, all of Bangladeshi appearance, who mysteriously surfaced and were standing on either side of the Commercial Road outside the Troxy. Now they were not, most of those people were not known to be socially or politically active, first of all. So who are these people? A significant number of those people were the gangsters. I mean, they were not bothered about the contents, the morality, the ethics or democracy. They were there being kind of ordered or orchestrated or organized or operated or handled to be there. And they couldn't care less about democracy, ethics, or morality, as I said. They are members of the gangs that dominate the council estates and the spaces outside people's homes on the council estates, in Shadwell and in other parts of the borough of Tower Hamlets. And they don't do anything that is moral or ethical as their main occupation. The main occupation is to maintain a criminal denial of ordinary safety and sense of belonging in the estates by the ordinary people resident or trying to be living on the estates. So it's a virtual criminal estates that exist right across Tower Hamlets. And most of the criminals most, we don't say everyone, but most of the criminals are committing crimes and criminally obstructing and denying basic amenities and basic safety and freedom to other Bangladeshis. Now, how many people would be prepared to say that they have done anything like a fraction of the thinking about these criminals and their criminal behavior, as we have been saying in this edition, let alone the contents of our previous editions and previous posts and publications. When the Bangladeshi so-called activists, I mean, this is a corrupt word itself, activist. Activist is a contemptible, stupid word. Activist for what? These are kind of a different kind of gangsters. These counselors and their closest kind of partners, when they interact with one another, they only do that about who is going to get what post or position in the council, in the Labour Party's bureaucratic arrangements. And the most they can expect, most of the highest level of their ambition is to grab hold of the elected positions or get some benefit. We shall come to the benefits a bit later. So the elected positions as councillors, and these are the sources of these individuals' financial rewards and the particular criminal clout that they have in doing favors. They don't operate as upholders of universal values and rights and legal entitlements for people, that the council is duty bound but is allowed impunity from discharging that duty. For example, those 4 schoolgirls from Bethnal Green. And it's amazing that none of the councillors, and I say none of the councillors in this context, the Bangladeshi councillors, that is the Labour Party councillors with Bangladeshi background, let's say, whether they're born in this country or born in Bangladesh, but actually their background is Bangladeshi. And these 4 schoolgirls are all 4 of them Bangladeshis. So to an innocent person observer, it would be the correct assumption to make to the effect that these Bangladeshi councillors would have some sensitive understanding of the gravity of the situation that these 4 schoolgirls have been put in. But to this day, and starting from the first published information about these girls being groomed and being seen as having crossed into Syria, let's say starting in the dates retrospectively referred to, go back to December 2014. But these retrospections came across in the reports published in the UK mainstream so-called media in February, sometime in February 2015. These girls have been in varying states of desperation, in vulnerability, exploitation, and so on since February 2015 up to now. up to now, this day, Sunday, the 16th of May 2021. And to our knowledge, not a single member of the council, generally, and not a single member of the Bangladeshi born or Bangladeshi origin councillors carrying the Labour Party card, of course, has spoken about these girls. And they have not spoken about the duties owed by the Town Council under safeguarding children duties or safeguarding the children duties. In fact, most of these councillors are ignorant, generally to begin with. But their ignorance is not excusable because we have been publishing and posting and making statements about all the duties and all the obligations owed by council and councillors to these children. So there is no excuse because our campaign is 24/7. And we have been campaigning for years, emphasizing the fact that there has been this duty to safeguard children and the fact that the duty has been neglected by Town Council and the fact that the role of the Town Council in neglecting the duties has been directly, centrally contributed, has been a contributory factor in the various stages of detriment and damage and harm suffered by these girls. So there is no pretense. There is no pretext, there is no room for a pretext by Townless councillors to claim that they didn't know. Even if they didn't know at the beginning, they had no excuse for not claiming that they didn't know later, because we have been filling the gap. And we have been doing that every single day to various extents, to various levels and various lengths of the analysis and updates. Now compare the failure of the councillors to talk about the criminal gangs controlling their states and making life absolutely unbearable for thousands and thousands and thousands of tenants and residents and occupants on these estates. Townless councillors don't say a thing. Now contrast that silence with the zeal and enthusiasm with which these councillors would rush to respond to the call, even from the lowliest of a white person, in social terms, in terms of status, etc. As Rabina Khan, a Bangladeshi councillor, but not a member of the Labour Party, but now a Labour Party kind of alternative, which is the Lib Dem. Rabina Khan, when she was a loyal, obedient member of the cabal fronted by Lutfur Rahman, boasted or boastfully told a meeting of Townless Council that she rushed in response to the call or calls to her made by a white man in Shadwell. She never spoke about any such response by her in response to any call, let alone calls made by a Bangladeshi person in either Shadwell or anywhere else in Tower Hamlets. So that is mental slavery, mental stoogery on the one hand, and absolute abdication of basic duty to the community generally, and the contemptuous and contemptible refusal to serve the lawfully owed duty in support of the needs of a Bangladeshi person. That is Rabina Khan. So this is on the record, not for the first time. Let Rabina Khan deny this, or let Rabina Khan's agent or agents or colluders deny this. So what is happening in Tower Hamlets in relation to the corrupt post of elected mayor is an accentuation, is an aggravation, is a worsening of the already very bad level of disservice by Bangladeshi councillors vis-a-vis the Bangladeshi ordinary voters and ordinary members of the community. The definition of ordinary here is to do with the non-existence of any secret kind of relationship between the individual Bangladeshi and the cabal connected with the political party or group. That is to say that negligence by Rabina Khan to serve the Bangladeshi counterpart, let's say, of the white man from the Shadwell area that she rushed to help. That is the central thing, that it is going on every day. And when Rabina Khan was told to do her duties, before the 2014 council election, she made an excuse. And she made a false, dishonest, untruthful, illegal excuse, saying that there was a pada imposed due to the election, and the pada meant that she could not meet member of the public during that time. It's an absolute lie. She dishonestly, ignorantly, and corruptly mentioned the pada in order to avoid having to answer overdue questions in her formal post as the cabinet member in the name of housing in Tower Hamlets. No Parda existed for that because the Parda doesn't cover local councils in any case, and also the Parda would only apply, if it ever did apply, to party political or electoral conversations. There was no chance. It was a completely different issue. And she knew it, and she refused to do her duty. And not only did she refuse to do her duty, she lied. So anyone reading the stuff about Rabina Khan, published by Raisis in Fleet Street, should look for the excuse like she is put on the independent website, the independent.co.uk website, depending on the topicality. And she always features by lying about the topical issue. For example, when the 2020 scandal broke about the disproportionate number of Asian and African people, or so-called BAME people, being treated with prejudice and discrimination and featuring disproportionate number of people who were found to have been or reported to have been victims of the COVID deaths in the care homes. She manipulated her way into appearing as if she's concerned about this. But the substance of what she said was totally empty. It's a zero. She merely repeated the news that had already dominated a lot of the coverage. And she didn't produce any reason for it. She didn't produce any insight, let alone any original insight or explanation. As she did on the 30th of April 2015, a week after Lutfur Rahman had been ousted by the order made by Richard Morey, appearing with Lutfur Rahman at the Water Lily Center in Mile End, during which Rabina Khan made repeated references to her being made by Lutfur Rahman what she was. But at that meeting, on that occasion, she also made references to the Bangladesh independence battle of 1971. She had no personal experience of that. Yet she made that because she was born after the Bangladesh independence battle. So that's the way that she kind of, how shall I say, it's an abuse of an image, regardless of whether she had any qualification or competence or part or role in the thing that she claims to be referring to. It's a long list of dishonesty on the part of Rabina Khan. And why we're talking about Rabina Khan? Because she was promoted by the Raisis in Tower Hamlets as being one of the more able candidates. She has not shown any ability to serve the electors, serve the community, uphold democracy, and oppose lying and corruption and criminality. So she was one of the candidates for the corrupt post of elected mayor. And all the races in Tower Hamlets kind of mentioned her in a positive ways. And the racists wanted to mention her in positive ways because they knew that she would, in terms of the agenda that racists favor, she would be one of their usable stooges. If she was one of their usable stooges, then what's the point of putting her in any post at all? Because being elected to a post ordinarily, generally, refers to the elected person being an independent, that is to say, objectively independent, advocate for rights and justice that are denied usually. But for 5 years that Rabina Khan was or 5 calendar years over which Rabina Khan was a loyal member of the cabal fronted by Lutfur Rahman, she did not do anything to our investigative knowledge and awareness, that was the right thing for the community, right thing for the people being denied service by the crooks in the council. So, what is she? Where did she come from? She didn't have any campaigning foundation before she surfaced as Lutfur Rahman's kind of ethnicity linked female promoter. And her first appearance was on the 14th of September 2010 at the Troxy. On that date, Lutfur Rahman was still, quote, the official candidate. 2010, 14th of September 2010. This changed in the following weeks, but on that date, that was the kind of claim that Lutfur Rahman could make, that he was the Labour Party's official candidate for the post of the elected mayor in Tower Hamlets. And Rabina Khan was the one that introduced the various parasites. As she was introducing the parasites, she must have been under the impression that her record would go unnoticed. She had no right to make the various positive references to Lutfur Rahman or anybody else that she was inviting on the platform. She had no right at all, because the political and social rights in the East End of London were attained and established and fought for by people, none of which was on the platform, none of whom she even knew. She didn't know them, nor did Lutfur Rahman. And to this day, none of them know these people fighting. She introduced several parasites, but two of the parasites I shall name here. One was a parasite called the Operation Black Votes, Uli. Now, Uli, until that date and since that date, has not been known to be a member of society that has anything to do with the ordinary population in Tower Hamlets, let alone the ordinary people of the Bangladeshi background, let's say. Come to that. Or indeed with the people of African origin in Tower Hamlets. Now, Uli is a part of the racist diversity display operation, not Operation Black Votes, but the racist diversity display operation. That is to say, Uli is one of those who is included in the exhibits as an exhibit of the diversity display, as he did in 2018, I think, or 2017. One of those years I shall check and then update accordingly. Uli was among the people that Theresa May sat with in the office in Downing Street, where she had to stage a photo shoot showing that she was actually capable of sitting along with a number of ethnicity linked individuals as the display of her diversity commitment. And Uli was there. And Uli, of course, was part of the operation Ken Lying Still Livingston kind of supported. It's the kind of operation that actually perpetuates the racist colonial domination. Just like they created, the Labour Party racists created the black section in the first half of the 1980s. And the black section kind of exhibits included Diana Abbott, of course, which is how she became known. And she was exhibited wearing that black section label on her t-shirt. We shall talk about the black section later, not this edition necessarily, but we shall talk by way of updates. And in the context of Operation Black Section and why there is no real anti-racist platform, either run by the supporters of the Operation Black Section or by any part of the mainly Asian origin people. So when Rabina Khan was peddled as Lutfur Rahman's kind of introducer, if you like, at the Troxy on the 14th of September 2010, she must have thought that she had arrived. She came across as being totally ignorant of the existence of the community. That was, 11 calendar years ago. And she remains of that contemptible and contemptuous ignorance and ignorant outlook. 11 calendar years on. Of course, she is displaying the ignorance under the cover of the Lib Dems. At that time, she was doing that under the cover of the racist Labour Party. Whatever the cover, whatever shelter she is given, Rabina Khan is a stooge. She was recruited as a stooge and she behaves as a stooge. She didn't make a reference either personally or collectively to the decades of struggle and fights and battles for rights against racists in this country. She introduced this Uli and she introduced this Ken Livingstone linked liar from Lewisham. And the liar from Lewisham then compounded the stupidity of the occasion by directly claiming that the Bangladeshi community, in effect, what he was meaning, should be grateful for Lutfur Rahman. Steve the Bullock lied. He didn't know the Bangladeshi community tablets, and he didn't know the Bangladeshi community anywhere. And he didn't know about Lutfur Rahman at all. What he did was not real knowledge about the community or about the individuals. Steve Bullock came across At the Troxy on the 14th of September 2010, just as Len McCluskey came across a few years later, towards the end of Lutfur Rahman's incumbency in the corrupt post of the elected mayor, when Len McCluskey posed for photographs standing near Lutfur Rahman and Shiraj of the campaign for Yes Mayor at the time in 2010. McCluskey didn't know the community and didn't have any respect for the community, because McCluskey's union, Unite, managed to get public money from Tar Hamlets Council while Lutfur Rahman was in post for running a centre in the Cable Street. Unite Union didn't need the money from Tar Hamlets Council, and yet it got the money. And there was no service. There was no service offered to the community by that centre, which was part of the recruitment centre for the purpose of Lutfur Rahman and Unite. And the fact that Tar Hamlets Council under Lutfur Rahman paid that money to the Unite Front based in the Cable Street was not an isolated event. This was exactly the kind of money abuse of public money, Tar Hamlets Council money, the people's money, that Lutfur Rahman made on multiple occasions, as reported by the accountants, PricewaterhouseCoopers, whose findings and report included the fact that Lutfur Rahman paid money, thousands and thousands of pounds, to a number of criminals. Well, they didn't say criminals, but we are saying criminals in context, who didn't even apply for the money. Even criminals didn't apply for the money, and Lutfur Rahman paid those criminals the money that didn't belong to Lutfur Rahman's family or his ancestors, but belonged to the ordinary people in Tar Hamlets of all races and all backgrounds. So these were the criminality activities, episodes that were to take place and get unfolded after Rabina Khan appeared at the stage, on the stage at the Troxy on the 14th of September 2010, and introduced a parade of parasites while she pumped words in praise of Lutfur Rahman that were completely unfounded, not factually true, and constitute a gross insult to the people in Tar Hamlets. Because Lutfur Rahman never had in his whole life taken part in any campaign and couldn't have. Couldn't have because of the record that he produced and created. And the record showed, record of his being a councillor. He never did. He was a product of the fixers that wanted to brainwash him and use him to their agenda, to promote and further their agenda and their interests. We shall be moving to the Satan Rushdie from this moment onwards. The Satan Rushdie confesses in that thing that the Guardian of Saturday has published. And quoting Satan Rushdie, I'm stupidly optimistic. Now, he says that he was stupidly optimistic because he believed there would be a happy ending when very few people did. Now, what the details of that happy ending are, we are not going into. But let's say that the diagnosis that we make of Rushdie is unique, but strictly on the evidence. We don't, and this is for the record, we don't dispute the fact that he has the right to express any views about anything. But we also add the condition that he hasn't got unlimited right to say anything about anything. He has to remember the consequences of incitement, of hatred that may affect people targeted by that incitement. This is what he did, because when he wrote, and he did intentionally, of course, he wrote the bits against Muslims. He did that knowing that Muslims would be affected, negatively, adversely affected, directly consequent upon his writing the lies and incitement against Muslims. So I'm not going to list all the things that he has said and written against Muslims. And he didn't have to name any Muslim. Of course, his satanic verses did more than name the Prophet. But the point is that in most of his so-called fiction, this criminal wrote intentionally to damage the collective image of Muslims. And to do so without having any evidence of any ordinarily understood or actually identifiable or traceable or mentionable crimes or wrongdoings done by any Muslim. So his mission was to approach the Muslim community and condemn the Muslim community for being Muslim. He did that in Midnight's Children. And what would he say? What would the criminal say? Now, he has nothing to say. He has nothing to say about the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Hindus in India, directly resulting from the criminal behavior of Narendra Modi and his BJP and Hindutva gangsters that have been in power for too long already. There is nothing comparable, remotely comparable, to the anti-Muslim hatred that Satan Rushdie spread and inflamed, that he has said anything like that about the role of the Hindutva Brahmins and fascists that have been destroying India. He has made comments, no doubt about that, but his comments were not, and are not, and will never be, in comparison with his dedicated campaign of lies and incitement against Muslims. It won't be anything like that. And we shall be, this is the introduction to Sayyid Rushdie's, or the updates on Sayyid Rushdie. We shall be checking the whole of the last, let's say, few years publication promoting Rushdie. And we shall be updating on that. Now, it is not a coincidence that Sayyid Rushdie is given this space by The Guardian. And this woman called Hadley Freeman appears to be an appointed fan. Look at this paragraph. Rushdie is many things to different people. Author, public intellectual. Now, who is the private intellectual then? Occasional actor, heretic, ex-husband to 4 women, and father to 2 sons. But the one thing everybody knows about him is that in 1989, 5 months after the publication of the Satanic Verses, the Ayatollah Khomeini called for his death, and he had to spend almost a decade in hiding. It is still one of the most notorious terrorist threats of all time. And even though the fatwa was nominally lifted in 1998, at which point he no longer had to have constant police protection and live a frantically peripatetic life in the shadows, Iranian hardliners, including the state media, still have a $4 million bounty on his head. This has now been going on for almost half Rushdie's life, and despite that, he has still managed to be one of the more prolific literary authors working today. Languages of Truth is his 20th book. Now, this Hadley Freeman is a liar, because most people who have tried to read his so-called books, most people who have commented on his Satanic Verses in particular, have said that it's unreadable. That is to say, it fails the test. It's not entertaining, it's not readable, it's not something that readers have enjoyed. Readers in the target community, the Western white people reading English. So, The Guardian and the BBC Newsnight, which had a regular commentator supporting Rushdie and his attacks on Muslims, who is a Canadian, who is gone back to Canada, and Diana Abbott, of course, was a supporter of Rushdie against the Muslims. The fact that Satan Rushdie has been elevated to a point where he is being given this generous kind of praise, and he is being heaped, he is being treated with multiple prizes, Booker Prize, this, that, and the other. This is not to be confused with inherent, intrinsic literary quantity and kind of quality in his writings. Why? Because unlike the ordinary writer, let's say, or most ordinary writers, Satan Rushdie was created by the Crusaders. Rushdie doesn't want to admit that, but he is a product of the Crusaders. And the Crusaders needed a tool and an instrument that had the diversity element about him. And the diversity element about him was an additional kind of value for him in the missionary Crusader battle against Muslims. That is what Rushdie is, and he's not a literary kind of writer in the way that Hadley Freeman praises him. And the fact that she has to say that the most important fact about his life is the targeting of him by the fatwa issued by the late Ayatollah Khomeini in 1989. I shall say another thing. The reason why it was Ayatollah Khomeini that issued that fatwa is not unconnected with the fact that most leaders of most Muslim countries or Muslim majority countries were in denial. And it took Ayatollah Khomeini to break that mold of silence and denial. And that was effective. Not that we supported, most certainly not supported the death kind of fatwa, but the fatwa didn't have just the death penalty attached. The fatwa was much more than the death penalty. And the fatwa was a clear statement summarizing Rushdie's role, Satan Rushdie's role. I'm calling it the Crusaders' stooge. The Khomeini fatwa didn't call him the stooge of the Crusaders. Well, Khomeini didn't possess the kind of knowledge that I possess, and I don't represent Khomeini's knowledge. I'm making a unique statement about Satan Rushdie based on the unique evidence that I have access to and I've studied. For example, in the updating of their attack on the Siloti Bangladeshis in Brick Lane, by stealing the name of a real place called Brick Lane and pretending that it was an achievement on the part of the stooge, Monica Ali, her crusading inventors and creators did the same thing as the counterparts, creating and commissioning and paying and promoting and platforming Satan Rushdie had done in the 1980s. And there are hundreds of examples of the Crusaders using stooges. But because of the ignorance, most of the Muslims don't refer to the crusade, and they actually get carried away and carried into and carried by the various contemporary words and phrases like terrorism. Well, as I have said, I don't know of any Muslim who is thinking of terrorism or has thought about terrorism at all. And it has never occurred to me to do anything terroristic, ever. And it will never. Because the role of a Muslim is not only to do no terrorism, but to do the opposite, peace of the highest universal level and standard. And the name Islam is self-evidently peace. Anyone who is a genuine believer and understands Islam genuinely must be a supporter, overwhelming supporter of peace. That's the manifesto for the world. Peace. Include and add to this all other aspects of all other faiths, that together serve peace. So that's the perspective. So when the sponsors and paymasters and mistresses and kind of commissioners employed Monica Ali and foisted her on the image of Brick Lane, they knew exactly what they were doing. And being an uneducated daughter of a Bengali father and a white mother, Monica Ali was not in a position to understand the impact and the implications. So she was a stooge. And as was Satan Rushdie of the missionaries. Because the Siloti-speaking Bangladeshis in Brick Lane are probably the only group of Muslims in a Western capital living in that kind of setting. Other people say the equivalents from North America in France are not that coherent. As coherent as the Siloti-speaking Bangladeshi Muslims have been for the best part of half a century, last century, and so far 21 years this century. So Monica Ali was a crusader's tool, as had been Satan Rushdie. But because the kind of Muslim ulema and preachers are ignorant most of the times about Western history, they didn't make the connection, and they haven't. And those who claim to be campaigning against Monica Ali, until I identified her real purpose, they were talking a lot of slogans without emphasizing the real identity and location, historical location and chain that Monica Ali was a part of. When I intervened in the context of Brick Lane being filmed. There was a threat that the book was going to be filmed in Brick Lane on location. So I started a campaign, but strictly based on the intellectual contents. Some abuse of the campaign took place by the so-called campaigners against Monica Ali, but they were not in the slightest interested in or aware of or even capable of understanding the deeper implications of the Monica Ali intervention against the Siloti-speaking Bangladeshis in Brick Lane. Those individuals decided to ride on the impact of our campaign and advertise themselves, even though they came across looking very stupid, because they became egocentric and egotistic rather than against the historical continuation of the attack on Muslims that Monica Ali's book was a part of. And we shall continue to dissect Monica Ali in due course and more. And this promotion of Rushdie by Hadley Freeman, The Guardian, it's called The Guardian Weekend, 15th of May 2021, pages 31, well, pages 30 with his picture up to page 35. This is a typical piece of criminal anti-Muslim hatred and conflation by The Guardian. The Guardian is historically an anti-Muslim organ, has been, and will remain so. This is the picture they're running of Saitan Rushdie in The Guardian kind of magazine. And they're praising him, despite the fact that he's they're praising him as in terms of his life, not just his writings. There is no recognition in Saitan Rushdie's own kind of comments and his contents, nor in the promotion of him by the likes of Hadley Freeman in The Guardian this weekend. And the same applies to the promotions and promoters of the likes of Monica Ali. There is no mention of the existence of the community. And yet, these are the communities that are defiled, defamed, slandered, and attacked by these crusader tools and anti-Muslim kind of weapons. And the fact that Ayatollah Khomeini made that fatwa should have been used in the years since he made the fatwa, 30 plus years on, to update the understanding of the world about the impact, the fact and the impact of the crusade. This hasn't happened. Because if people talked about the crusades, then they would understand the current attacks by the West, by Christian West, on so many Muslim countries, and the West's hostility to the human rights of the Muslims being violated. As we have said, violated in China, as highlighted by the violations of the Uyghurs, but there are other Muslims, other Muslim areas in China that have been for a long time been attacked from the standpoint of hostility towards Muslims. And the fact that in Yemen, the attackers are being armed by the West. The attackers are the Saudis. And the attacks right across from Iraq to Syria. All these attacks would have been understandable or understood clearly if there were understanding and informed updates on the crusade. Now contrast that with the references by Joe Biden to the attacks by the Turks on the Armenians, and Biden's statement that the Turks' attack on the Armenians constituted genocide. How long ago was that? Compared to the Uyghurs and the Rohingyas and the Yemenis and the Syrian people and the Iraqi people, the attacks on the Armenians must be treated as serious attacks and violations. So why didn't Joe Biden start with the Palestinians? Were the Armenians being attacked by the Muslim Turks as viciously and for as long as for so many decades as the Palestinians are being attacked by their persecutors and oppressors? And the questions must be asked. And Shaitan Rushdie must be treated as an agent of the Crusaders based on the effect and the impact and the contents and the implications. We shall be continuing